He was accused of a crime he never committed. A 74-year-old black veteran betrayed by the system he once defended with his life. Handcuffed, humiliated, left to carry the weight of lies. But beside him stood one loyal protector, a scarred German shepherd who refused to back down. What happened next shook an entire town and proved that truth cannot be buried forever. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. And if you believe justice is a duty, not a privilege, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear will stay with you long after it ends. The Bentley glided through the rain-soaked avenues until it reached Margaret's mansion in the Garden District, a sprawling white-columned estate wrapped in iron gates and magnolia trees bent low with water. The place looked more like a museum than a home, its marble steps glistening with rain and lanterns casting amber halos in the storm. Carver parked at the front entrance. The moment the car doors opened, the sound of rain was replaced by the quiet shuffle of staff rushing forward with umbrellas. Margaret ignored them all. Her eyes were on the boy and his dog. Ethan clutched Ranger tightly as if the marble house might swallow him whole. His thin body trembled not just from cold but from fear. He had never stood before anything so grand. His hand tightened on Ranger's scruff, the dog leaning against him, ribs pressing sharply under the wet fur. Margaret's voice cut through the silence, softer than before yet carrying the steel of habit. "Prepare a room. And call Dr. Lillian Crane immediately." Dr. Crane arrived less than half an hour later, her sedan splashing up the driveway. She was a woman in her early 40s, tall and lean, her auburn hair pinned into a bun that had loosened in the rain. Known across the city as a skilled veterinarian, she carried herself with brisk efficiency, though her eyes, hazel flecked with gold, softened whenever she looked at an animal. Years earlier, she had lost her brother, a police officer, during a raid gone wrong. Since then, she had dedicated her life to caring for working dogs, saying it was her way of looking after his partners. She stepped into the parlor where Ethan and Ranger sat dripping on the carpet. "Lord have mercy," she whispered, kneeling instantly. Her hands moved over Ranger with professional precision, checking gums, listening to his chest, tracing the scar down his side. She frowned at the protruding ribs. Severe malnutrition. "But see this?" She pressed a spot near Ranger's ear and the dog lifted his head, ears twitching despite his weakness. "That's a trained response. This dog was once K9. Ethan stiffened, his eyes darting to Margaret. "They threw him away when he got too old, but he never stopped guarding me." His voice cracked, and he stroked Ranger's head as if to prove his words. Dr. Crane nodded slowly. "He still has his reflexes. Age has slowed him, hunger has broken him down, but inside, he's still a soldier." She tilted Ranger's head gently to reveal the collar tag. The letters were weathered, but she squinted. "K9 Unit, Badge 4312, Ranger." Margaret caught her breath. That name again. Not coincidence, not fantasy. The collar confirmed it. Her fingers tightened on the back of a chair. "He belongs here now," she said firmly. Dr. Crane injected fluids, set up a small IV drip with practiced ease, then rose. "He'll live, but he needs steady food, rest, and care. If you keep him, understand he will bond to you like steel. Dogs like this don't let go." Ethan's pale face flickered between hope and fear. He still didn't fully trust Margaret, not yet. To him, rich houses meant rules, and rules often meant being thrown out. But when Ranger lifted his head, pressing his muzzle into Margaret's palm, something in the boy's eyes changed. While Dr. Crane packed her bag, another figure appeared at the door, Detective David Harper. At 38, Harper was not the kind of man who blended easily into a crowd. Broad-shouldered, sandy blonde hair clipped short, his square jaw was dusted with salt and pepper stubble that gave him a rugged air. His steel-gray eyes missed little, scanning the room the way a soldier scans a battlefield. He wore a simple gray suit under a damp navy raincoat, the badge at his hip glinting. Harper had built a reputation in New Orleans PD's anti-trafficking unit. Years of chasing human smugglers had carved hard lines into his face. He wasn't unkind, but he rarely smiled, carrying with him the weight of the cases that slipped through his fingers. Tonight he had come not for Margaret, but because of Ranger. "I heard you picked up a stray," Harper said in a gravelly voice, glancing at the shepherd. That caller 4312 was assigned to the K9s at the warehouse precinct 10 years ago. He crouched slightly, studying Ranger's weary eyes. Funny thing is, I've been tracking a smuggling ring out of those same warehouses. Bayou Lanterns. They move people like freight, hide them in shipping crates. And now here's a retired K9 from that division, half dead on the street. Margaret's brows knit. Are you suggesting coincidence? Coincidence doesn't exist in my line of work, Harper muttered. He extended a hand cautiously toward Ethan. Kid, what's your name? Ethan hesitated, looking to Margaret as though seeking permission. She gave a small nod. Ethan Miller. Where have you been living, Ethan? Harper asked gently, crouching to meet the boy's eye level. Ethan bit his lip. His voice was low, reluctant, but truthful. At the old church, St. Bridget's. Been there since Mama died. 2 years. Margaret inhaled sharply. The image of a boy surviving alone under a church roof made her stomach twist. Harper nodded grimly. That church is 3 blocks from a Bayou Lanterns drop site. If you saw or heard anything, it could matter. But Ethan shook his head quickly. I don't know nothing. We just hide. I just try to keep Ranger alive. The dog, as if understanding, gave a low chuff and pressed closer against the boy's side. Harper's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. His instincts told him this wasn't just a chance meeting of a boy and his dog. Smugglers, retired K9, a dead mother, it smelled of something deeper. But he didn't press. Not yet. Margaret stood straighter, her voice cutting with sudden authority. Detective, I don't care about coincidences or rings. This boy and this dog are under my protection now. Harper studied her. He had known Margaret Whitmore's name for years, whispered in City Hall corridors. Untouchable, cold, powerful. Yet the woman before him now was different, her hand resting on Ranger's head, her eyes fixed on the boy's trembling shoulders. He gave a slight nod. Then you'd better be ready. If Bayou Lanterns has any connection to this, trouble will come looking. For the first time in years, Margaret didn't flinch at the thought of trouble. Instead, she looked down at Ethan and Ranger, her voice calm but resolute. Let it come. We'll be ready. The storm outside continued, lashing against the magnolia trees. But inside the mansion, a strange new alliance was forming. A wounded dog, a lost boy, a billionaire widow, and a weary detective, each carrying scars of their own, each about to be drawn into a story that none of them could yet imagine. The metallic click of the handcuffs was louder than it should have been, echoing against the glass storefronts along Main Street. A few passers-by slowed to watch, their murmurs weaving into the humid Oregon air. Ethan Cole, his expression carved into grim authority, locked the cuffs around Sam Whitaker's thin wrists. Sam did not resist. His broad shoulders remained square, his eyes steady, and there was a silence about him that unsettled Naomi Price far more than any loud protest could have. It was the silence of a man who seemed to know this was inevitable, as though he had lived this scene in another lifetime. Ranger reacted violently. The German shepherd snarled, teeth flashing in the morning light, and lunged forward until the leash pulled taut. His paws scraped the sidewalk, nails clattering like claws on glass. The dog's bark broke through the morning calm, sharp and furious, drawing even more eyes from the crowd. Ethan tensed, his hand twitching toward his holster, but Naomi stepped between them. She lowered a hand toward Ranger, speaking softly, her tone even. Easy, boy. We're not hurting him. Ranger's growl softened but did not stop. His amber eyes burned into Ethan's, as though accusing him. From across the street, Sheriff Harold Mitchell approached. He was a man in his late 50s, stocky with a thick neck and a face that carried the weathering of both age and arrogance. His thinning silver hair was combed neatly back, but his posture radiated a confidence too practiced, almost theatrical. Mitchell had run the Redwood Bluff Sheriff's Department for 15 years and had grown used to bending situations to fit his narrative. His reputation was complex, praised by some for decisiveness and despised by others for shortcuts and questionable arrests. Behind his polite smile lived a man who had long ago decided that protecting his authority was more important than protecting justice. Good work, Cole, Mitchell barked, his baritone voice carrying across the sidewalk. That's the man we're looking for. Get him processed quickly. People need to see we're not asleep at the wheel. Naomi's jaw tightened. She glanced at Sam, his calm gaze, his steady breathing, the way he almost seemed detached, as if this was less an injustice and more a familiar inevitability. That composure gnawed at her instincts. She knew what it looked like when a guilty man was cornered. This wasn't it. As Ethan began guiding Sam toward the cruiser, Ranger sniffed sharply, head jerking toward the alleyway. A garbage truck idled there, exhaust mixing with the tang of industrial cleaner. The German Shepherd pulled hard, nose pressed against the air, hackles stiffening. Naomi caught the faint acrid scent too. Something chemical, bitter, not quite the smell of refuse. She noted it quietly but didn't speak. Mitchell was watching. "Cole Price," Mitchell ordered, his hands folded over his belt buckle. "Don't get lost chasing shadows. We've got our guy. Let's give the town a show of order." As the group moved, something slipped from Sam's shirt pocket. Naomi bent quickly, retrieving it before Mitchell could notice. It was a worn military identification card, laminated edges fraying with age. The name read Samuel J. Whitaker, stamped with a classification emblem she didn't recognize. It bore a seal, subtle but official, marking it once as top security clearance. Naomi tucked it into her pocket quietly, her heart quickening. This man was no ordinary retiree. From the crowd, a pair of eyes followed silently. A man leaned against the lamppost across the street, tall, lean, his frame swallowed by a green hoodie. His jawline was sharp, with a thin scar slicing from chin to ear. His hands were hidden in his pockets, but his gaze was fixed on Sam and Ranger. He was Vance Harlow, mid-30s, an enigmatic drifter known only in whispers around town. Vance had a reputation in the underbelly of Redwood Bluff, a fixer for stolen goods, a ghost who slipped through alleys when police cars drove by. Most people dismissed him as rumor, but Naomi had heard his name in passing during an unsolved burglary last year. Now, seeing him so intent on this scene, her instincts screamed. Before she could move closer, Vance caught her eye. He smiled faintly, tipped his hood lower, and melted into the dispersing crowd. The air felt heavier. Naomi turned back to see Sam entering the police cruiser, Ethan closing the door with a hollow thud. Ranger barked and leapt, straining the leash, his claws scraping grooves into the concrete as though the earth itself should not allow this mistake. Sam raised his hand, palm outward, a gesture as if calming his companion. The dog whimpered once, but his eyes never left his master. Naomi followed Ethan toward their own squad car. Her voice was low, tight with frustration. "Something's not right. He didn't even flinch. And that ID card." Ethan shot her a warning glance. "Not here. Not now." Sheriff Mitchell stepped forward, his voice pitched for the bystanders. "Citizens of Redwood Bluff, let this be clear. We protect our town. No one is above the law." He gestured toward the cruiser holding Sam. "Justice will be served." The crowd murmured some nodding approvingly, others exchanging uneasy glances. Naomi noticed Caleb, the newspaper boy, hovering at the edge of the sidewalk, his freckled face pale. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again when Mitchell's eyes swept over him. The boy clutched his stack of papers tighter and turned away, disappearing into the throng. Inside the police cruiser, Sam sat motionless, hands cuffed, eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the windshield. His lips curved into the faintest of smiles, an expression not of joy, but of recognition. He had seen this pattern before, decades ago, in cities and nations where innocence meant little against suspicion. For him, this was not an ending, but the opening move of a game he knew too well. Ranger barked once more, a sound that carried like a warning across the quieting street. The rain had begun as a drizzle on the tin roof of Redwood Bluff Sheriff's Department, tapping its way into a steady rhythm by the time Sam Whitaker was led into the interrogation room. The room was stark, fluorescent lights humming overhead, paint peeling slightly at the corners. A metal table separated Sam from Ethan Cole, who set a file thick with papers in front of him. Naomi Price stood near the wall, arms folded, her eyes shifting between Sam and Ethan with a suspicion she no longer cared to hide. Sam sat upright, his cuffed hands resting calmly on the table, posture unyielding. He looked more like a man awaiting a briefing than a suspect awaiting judgment. His eyes, dark and steady, watched Ethan without hostility, almost as if he was assessing him. His composure was unsettling. It made Ethan feel less like an officer in control and more like a young recruit in front of a superior. Ethan flipped the file open. Samuel J. Whitaker, born 1949, Charleston, South Carolina. Retired Chief Master Sergeant, Air Force Intelligence. 35 years of classified service. Commendations from 3 administrations. He glanced up, his voice quieter. Decorated, distinguished service medal, bronze star. He cleared his throat, discomfort prickling at his neck. Sam's voice was deep but calm, each word weighted. And yet, here I am, accused of stealing pills from a pharmacy. The air in the room thickened. Naomi shifted, catching Ethan's glance. She could see the hesitation behind his eyes, but Ethan had lived long enough under Sheriff Mitchell's command to know hesitation was dangerous. The phone on the wall buzzed. Ethan picked it up, listened briefly, and turned slightly pale. "Yes, sir, I understand." He hung up, jaw tight. The voice on the other end had belonged to the county commissioner, repeating the mayor's warning. "Don't dig too deep, Cole. We need results, not questions." Naomi's lips pressed into a thin line. She'd overheard enough of the conversation to know the message. They don't want the truth. They just want a scapegoat. Before Ethan could respond, the door opened and Sergeant Alan Draper stepped in. Draper was in his late 40s, with thinning sandy hair and a frame that looked softened by years of paperwork rather than patrol. He had a habit of chewing gum loudly, which made him seem perpetually casual. But those who knew him well knew he was cautious, preferring to keep his head down rather than challenge authority. He carried a folder under his arm. "Sheriff wants him processed within the hour," Draper muttered, eyes avoiding Sam's. He placed the folder on the desk, then looked at Ethan and Naomi. "You two don't waste time." He turned quickly and left, his gum snapping as the door shut. Naomi exhaled slowly, then made her decision. "I want to take Ranger back to the pharmacy. He's trained, and maybe he'll pick up something we missed." She didn't wait for Ethan's approval. She knew he'd hesitate. Instead, she walked out to the lobby where Ranger had been pacing restlessly, his amber eyes sharp even under the dim lights. The rain outside had strengthened, soaking the asphalt and washing the town in silver gray. Naomi opened the cruiser door and Ranger leapt in, settling with his head alert at the window. The drive back to Main Street was tense. Naomi's thoughts churned with rumors she'd picked up from a dispatcher friend in Portland, that Sheriff Mitchell had a history of building cases from shaky evidence, each one boosting his image as a strong, decisive leader. If true, this would be his most dangerous fabrication yet. At the pharmacy, the neon open sign flickered weakly, reflecting in puddles. Naomi clipped Ranger's leash and gave him a low command. His ears pricked, nose immediately lowering to the ground as he led her to the alleyway. Rainwater streamed along the cracked pavement, carrying faint traces of refuse. Ranger stopped at a dented steel trash bin, sniffed intently, then growled low. Naomi pulled on gloves and pried open the lid. Inside lay soaked cardboard, spoiled produce, and half-buried a latex glove streaked with white powder. She bagged it carefully, noting the acrid chemical smell. "Good boy," she murmured, stroking Ranger's head. The dog pressed his nose deeper into the corner, pawing at a scrap of fabric caught on the rusted fence. Naomi pulled it free, a torn piece of dark green cloth, edges frayed, smelling faintly of cologne and damp earth. A hoodie scrap. Her pulse quickened. Caleb's description of a man in a green hoodie echoed in her mind. She sealed both items in evidence bags. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Liam, her younger brother who worked as a paramedic in Portland. She had sent him a quick description of the chemical smell earlier. His reply was concise. "That's acetaminophen filler, used in cheap pill mills." Her stomach nodded. This was no small-town shoplifting. This was organized. Back at the station, Ethan rubbed his temples as Naomi returned, dripping rainwater on the floor. She laid the evidence bags on the desk. "This is what Ranger found. Glove, powder, and a hoodie scrap. I'm sending it for testing." Ethan stared at the items, then glanced at Sam through the one-way glass of the interrogation room. The old man sat exactly as they had left him, back straight, hands folded neatly, patience unshaken. Ethan felt a pang of unease. Naomi spoke lower, leaning in. "You see what's happening, don't you? Mitchell wants Whitaker to take the fall, but this points to someone else, someone organized." Before Ethan could respond, Mitchell himself strode into the office. His heavy boots echoed on the linoleum, his expression controlled but his eyes sharp. "What's all this?" he demanded, gesturing at the bags. "Evidence," Naomi said flatly. "Not from Whitaker, from behind the pharmacy." Mitchell's jaw tightened. "Irrelevant. The town needs closure. Don't go chasing ghosts." He picked up the bag with the hoodie scrap, held it for a moment, then tossed it back on the desk as though it were trash. Focus on what's in front of you." When he left, silence stretched in his wake. Ethan finally spoke, his voice low. "He's hiding something." Naomi met his eyes. "Then we're going to find out what." Behind them, Ranger lay on the station floor, his head resting on his paws. But his eyes never strayed from the door to the interrogation room, where Sam waited in silence, as though he knew this was only the beginning. The rain had slowed to a drizzle by the time Naomi Price steered the cruiser out of town. Ranger perched in the back seat with his muzzle pressed against the glass. The scent he had locked onto near the pharmacy alley had not left him restless, and now his nose twitched with a determination that Naomi had learned never to ignore. Ethan Cole drove beside her, his silence heavy, his hands gripping the wheel too tightly as the forested outskirts of Redwood Bluff gave way to industrial lots, long forgotten. They pulled up near warehouse number 12, a corrugated metal structure leaning against the mist like an old soldier slumping after battle. The paint was faded to dull gray, the padlock on its gate corroded, but Ranger paced anxiously the moment his paws hit the muddy ground. Naomi tugged her jacket tighter, the hood drawn up against the drizzle. Ethan scanned the perimeter, his jaw clenched. The warehouse lot was littered with broken pallets and weeds pushing through cracked asphalt. Naomi spotted faint tire tracks still wet from the rain. "Someone's been here recently," she murmured. Ethan exhaled but said nothing, his eyes darting back toward the road as though worried they were being watched. Ranger stopped near a side door and began scratching at the rusted metal, his growl low but insistent. Naomi knelt to inspect the lock. It had been forced recently. The latch bent. With Ethan's nod, she pushed the door open, and the musty scent of mildew and oil drifted out. They stepped inside. The interior was dim, light filtered through broken skylights. Piles of crates leaned drunkenly against each other, some stenciled with faded shipping labels. And in the far corner, chained to a pipe, sat a young man. He was gaunt, his hoodie ripped at the elbow, mud smeared across his jeans. His hair was shaggy, damp from the leaks dripping through the roof, and his wide hazel eyes darted up in fear the moment he heard Ranger's claws on the floor. "Stay back!" he shouted hoarsely, tugging at the chain on his wrist. Naomi raised a calming hand. "We're not here to hurt you. What's your name?" He hesitated, lips trembling before he spoke. Tyler Briggs. I'm 19. Tyler was a thin figure, tall but underfed, his cheekbones too sharp, his hands shaking with more than just cold. His voice carried the quiver of someone who had been cornered one too many times. The desperation in his eyes was raw, but beneath it Naomi sensed guilt gnawing. Ethan crouched a few feet away, keeping his voice even. "Who chained you here, Tyler?" Tyler swallowed, glanced at Ranger, then back at Ethan. Vance Harlow. He runs the pills, the fake ones. Said if I didn't help, he'd make me disappear." He shuddered, pulling his knees closer. "I did runs for him, carrying bags, moving stuff between drop-offs, but when I told him I wanted out, he locked me up here." Naomi pulled out her phone, setting it to record. Her tone was measured but firm. "Did Vance have anything to do with Samuel Whitaker being arrested?" Tyler's head dropped, his voice breaking. "It was him. He told me. He said if we pinned it on the old man, no one would dig deeper. Said the sheriff would take the bait." His breath hitched. "I saw him plant things in the pharmacy trash, things meant to make it look like Sam was hanging around too much." Ranger paced nearby, nose twitching toward a heap of old uniforms thrown carelessly against the wall. Naomi followed his gaze, frowning. She walked over and lifted a stained bundle police-issue shirts, the sheriff's department patch still visible on the sleeve. Ranger barked sharply, pawing at the fabric with an urgency that set Naomi's stomach twisting. Ethan stood stiff, his face pale. "Uniforms. In here?" Tyler's eyes widened. "Yeah. I don't know who gave them to him, but Vance bragged he had a cop watching his back. Said that's why he never gets caught." Naomi held up the uniform, the patches damp but still legible. Her heart raced. This was not just a criminal operation, it was being shielded from the inside. Her mind darted back to Sheriff Mitchell's sharp dismissal of evidence, his eagerness to close the case against Sam. She looked at Ethan, and the unspoken suspicion hung between them. But Ethan's loyalty to his badge wavered. He rubbed his forehead, his voice ragged. "If this is true, then admitting it means acknowledging we got the wrong man. And Mitchell, he won't let this stand." Naomi pressed the record button harder on her phone. Better to admit a mistake than bury an innocent man. Tyler leaned forward urgently, eyes pleading. "Please, I'll testify. I'll say everything I know. Just don't send me back to him. Vance, he doesn't forgive." Before Ethan could respond, a sound broke the tense air, the faint crunch of gravel outside. Ranger froze, ears pricked, his low growl vibrating in the silence. Naomi extinguished her flashlight, motioning Ethan down. Through a gap in the broken window, they saw the shadow of a man passing near the entrance, a cigarette tip glowing faintly red in the drizzle. Naomi whispered, "We have to move him now. Someone's checking on this place." Ethan unclipped the chain on Tyler's wrist with a quick snap of his multi-tool. Tyler winced as circulation returned, rubbing the raw skin. Naomi guided him toward the side exit, Ranger leading, his hackles raised but his movements controlled. The moment they stepped into the damp air, the figure near the front door turned his head just enough for Naomi to glimpse a scar running from chin to ear. Vance. But he didn't see them. Not yet. Naomi held her breath as Ranger silently herded them toward the cruiser, his body low, muscles taut. They made it to the car just as Ranger barked once, loud and sharp. Vance spun, eyes narrowing, but by the time he reached the side door, the cruiser's engine had roared to life, tires spitting water from the asphalt. As they sped away, Ethan kept his eyes on the rearview mirror, jaw tight. "You realize what this means," he said. "If Mitchell is the one shielding him," Naomi's voice was hard, "then the rot goes deeper than we thought." Tyler sat trembling in the back seat, his hands clutching his knees, his voice barely a whisper. "He'll come after me. He won't stop." Ranger turned his head, resting his muzzle gently against the boy's arm, his steady presence a wordless promise of protection. Tyler blinked rapidly, startled by the simple comfort. The rain thickened again, streaking across the windshield like bars of a cage. But for the first time, Naomi felt the case cracking open, fragile yet undeniable. The lumber dock sat on the edge of Redwood Bluffs River, a forgotten relic of a time when logging had been the town's lifeblood. Now the wooden beams were warped and blackened with rot, the old crane rusted and silent, the water below reflecting only fragments of the moon through the mist that rolled in off the Cascade foothills. The air smelled of wet pine and iron. It was close to midnight, and the rain had thinned to a cold drizzle, the kind that slid down collars and soaked boots. The dock creaked when Ethan Cole and Naomi Price stepped onto it, Ranger walking between them, alert and taut like a bowstring ready to snap. Tyler Briggs followed close, his frame trembling beneath a borrowed jacket. His face looked even younger under the yellowish glow of the dock lamps, freckles darkened by rain and hair plastered to his forehead. Fear clung to him, but his voice carried a note of resolve he hadn't shown before. "He'll come tonight. Vance never misses a trade. If I show up, he'll think I gave in." His hands tightened into fists. "But you better protect me. He won't let me walk away twice." Naomi crouched beside Ranger, adjusting the black collar strapped snugly around his neck. Her fingers clipped a small device into place, barely larger than a coin, a hidden mini camera with a blinking green light that quickly turned steady. "Good boy," she whispered, stroking behind his ears. Ranger blinked his amber eyes at her, then lifted his head high as though already understanding his new mission. Ethan stood further back, his broad frame silhouetted against the mist. His blue-gray eyes moved between Tyler and Naomi, the conflict inside him plain. He was a man trained to follow chains of command, yet Naomi's plan, this dangerous trap, forced him to question whether that chain was rotten. His instincts screamed caution, but his conscience pulled him toward her. At exactly midnight, headlights cut through the fog. An old black pickup rattled into view, its engine coughing as it pulled to a stop at the far end of the dock. Vance Harlow stepped out, his hood up, his scar catching the dim light like a slash of silver against his cheek. He moved with a confidence that was almost lazy, his hands hidden deep in his pockets. His gaze swept over Tyler first, then Naomi, then Ethan. Finally, his eyes landed on Ranger, who stood stock still, his body a perfect line of tension. "Well, well," Vance drawled, his voice smooth, mocking. "Tyler, you disappoint me. Thought I told you to stay put." He tossed a small package onto the dock, a plastic-wrapped bundle of pills, rattling faintly. "And you brought company." Tyler swallowed hard, but Naomi stepped forward. "This ends tonight, Vance. We have what we need." She tapped her pocket where the evidence lay. Vance smirked, but a faint crackle broke the silence, the sound of static. Ranger's ears flicked first, catching it before anyone else. He growled low, moving toward Vance, nose twitching. Naomi's eyes narrowed as she spotted the small black device clipped inside Vance's sleeve. A police-issue radio, its red light blinking faintly. Ethan froze. That's a sheriff's frequency. Vance's grin widened, almost gleeful. Smart dog. Smarter than your bosses, that's for sure. He tugged the radio slightly, letting them see it clearly. You really think I've been running this whole operation without help? Mitchell's been my insurance for years. He gets his numbers, I get my product, and everyone's happy. Naomi's stomach knotted. She glanced at Ethan, but his face was stricken, pale in the fog. He had heard rumors, yes, but to see the proof glowing on Vance's wrist shook his very foundation. Ranger barked suddenly, a sharp warning. Vance darted toward the dock's edge, and in an instant the chase erupted. Naomi sprinted after him, her boots slapping against the soaked boards. Ethan followed, torn between grabbing Tyler and backing Naomi. Ranger surged forward, a streak of black and tan, his muscles coiled with years of discipline. He slammed into Vance just as the man tried to leap toward the shadows, knocking him hard to the planks. The radio clattered free, skidding across the wood. Naomi reached for her cuffs, but a new voice cut the air. Nobody move. From the darkness beneath the dock's crane, Sheriff Harold Mitchell stepped into view. His bulk filled the space with authority, his uniform immaculate even in the rain, his service pistol steady in his hand. The mist curled around him like smoke, but the sneer on his face was clear. Ethan froze where he stood, his heart hammering. He had respected Mitchell once, even defended him against murmurs of misconduct. Now, faced with the truth in flesh, he felt his loyalty collapsing. Naomi's jaw clenched. You've been shielding him, letting him run this ring under your nose. Mitchell's laugh was humorless, bitter. Shielding him? No. Guiding him. Vance is useful. This town doesn't need chaos, it needs order. And sometimes, order requires ugly deals. He leveled the gun, not at Naomi, not at Ethan, but at Ranger. And sometimes, witnesses need to be silenced. Ranger growled, standing protectively over Vance, whose smirk had faltered now that his shield had stepped into the light. Naomi's breath caught, panic rising, but then Tyler shouted, his voice cracking against the mist. Sam Whitaker is innocent. You know it. You planted it all. Mitchell's eyes flicked toward Tyler. For just a second, his mask slipped the slightest hesitation, a twitch at the corner of his mouth. It was enough. Ethan saw it, recognized it, and the weight of years of obedience shattered in that instant. Harold, Ethan said, his voice steady despite his racing pulse. Put the gun down. This isn't order. This is rot. But Mitchell's eyes hardened again, his finger tightening on the trigger. The mist closed in, the night holding its breath. The sheriff's department was cloaked in a tense quiet, the kind that came just before a storm breaks. Rain still pattered against the windows, streaking the glass with watery shadows. Inside, the main squad room smelled faintly of stale coffee and damp uniforms. Naomi Price stood at the center of it, her dark eyes fixed on the laptop screen balanced on the evidence table. The video feed was grainy, shaky from Ranger's movement, but the audio was unmistakable. Sheriff Harold Mitchell's voice, low and confident, trading words with Vance Harlow and accepting a wad of bills. Ethan Cole stood beside her, jaw clenched so tight the muscles twitched. His broad shoulders sagged under the weight of betrayal. For years he had believed in Mitchell's gruff authority, had dismissed whispers of misconduct as political gossip. Now, watching his commanding officer pocket bribe money while speaking of order through control, he felt his faith collapse like rotting timber. Mitchell himself sat cuffed to a chair across the room, his once proud uniform soaked and muddy from the dock confrontation. His silver hair clung damp to his forehead, his eyes sharp and furious. He looked less like a lawman and more like a cornered predator, baring his teeth even as the walls closed in. Ranger sat at his feet, heavy paws pressed against Mitchell's boots, a low growl rumbling from deep within his chest whenever the man shifted too suddenly. The German shepherd's amber gaze glowed like coals, his scar catching the fluorescent light. You're making a mistake, Mitchell spat, voice dripping with venom. That video means nothing without context. You think the town's going to believe a mutt with a camera over the man who kept them safe for 15 years? Naomi didn't flinch. It's not the dog they'll believe. It's the truth. She tapped the space bar, pausing the video at the precise moment Mitchell's hand closed over the money. Ethan turned his back briefly, pressing a hand to his forehead. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. All those years, I defended you, lied to myself, lied to others. And you've been rotting this place from the inside. He turned suddenly, his service weapon drawn and steady, pointed at Mitchell. Not anymore. Mitchell smirked, despite the gun trained on him. You think you're any better, Cole? You followed my orders. You arrested that old man without a second thought. You're just as guilty. The words struck harder than Ethan wanted to admit. His fingers trembled slightly, but Naomi's steady presence beside him anchored him back. The door to the interrogation wing creaked open, and Samuel Whitaker entered, escorted by Sergeant Alan Draper. Sam's posture was as erect as ever, his pressed shirt collar damp from the rain outside, his expression unreadable. Draper, by contrast, looked uneasy, his eyes flicking nervously between Mitchell and the others as though terrified to pick a side. Sam's gaze swept the room, lingering on Mitchell before settling on Ranger. The dog's ears pricked, tail wagging once, a soundless greeting. Sam moved closer, his hands folded behind his back, his calm presence filling the space like a tide rolling in. I've lived my whole life with the smell of lies, Sam said, his deep voice resonating with quiet authority. In briefing rooms, in war zones, in politics. But tonight, for the first time in a long while, I see people brave enough to name those lies aloud. His eyes flicked to Ethan, then to Naomi, steady and approving. Don't waste that courage, Mitchell snarled, jerking against his cuffs, his chair screeching across the tile. In an instant, Ranger lunged, teeth bared, pinning the sheriff's leg with his weight. Mitchell froze, his face pale now where arrogance had been. The growl that rolled from Ranger was not one of show, it was primal, protective, a warning that the era of Mitchell's unchecked power had ended. Naomi opened a folder on the desk. Inside lay a hastily drafted witness statement. She slid it toward Tyler Briggs, who sat trembling at the corner of the room. His skinny hands shook as he signed his name, each letter a blow against the fear that had shackled him. I swear it, he said quietly, pushing the paper back. Sam Whitaker's innocent. Vance made me help set him up. And Mitchell, he's been protecting Vance the whole time. The pen clattered onto the desk, its sound final. For the first time in days, Sam allowed a small smile. Ethan holstered his weapon slowly, the tension in his body draining like a dam finally cracked. He looked at Naomi, voice low, steady. We were wrong. About Sam. About everything. He faced the old veteran. I can't undo that, but I can start fixing it. Naomi straightened, her voice sharp as a blade. Then we don't stop here. We open a full investigation, every file, every arrest Mitchell touched, every report he signed. We tear this rot out by the roots. Ethan nodded, his eyes resolute. Agreed. Sam leaned against the table, folding his weathered hands. The truth has weight, heavy, sometimes unbearable, but lift it anyway. If you don't, it will crush you. Outside, the rain began to lighten. A faint glow from the street lamp spilled into the room, hinting at dawn. Ranger settled at Sam's side, his growl gone, replaced with the quiet contentment of a soldier who had done his duty. The morning of the festival dawned bright and clear, as if Redwood Bluff itself had willed away the storms of the past week. The pines lining the riverbank shimmered under the sunlight, their needles glistening with dew. Banners of red and gold fluttered from lampposts along Main Street, and the aroma of fresh pies, kettle corn, and roasting meat filled the air. For the first time in weeks, the town's chatter was filled with anticipation rather than tension. Samuel Whitaker walked slowly through the crowd, his tall frame casting a long shadow on the cobblestones. He wore a pressed navy blazer, a veteran's pin gleaming against the lapel. At 74, his stride was deliberate, measured by both years of discipline and the weight of recent days. Children darted past him carrying balloons, and he gave them a faint smile, his lined face softening. At his side padded Ranger, the German shepherd drawing admiring glances from festival-goers. His black and tan coat gleamed in the sunlight, his left ear bent slightly as always, giving him a rugged charm. Children pointed and whispered, "That's the hero dog." Ranger accepted the attention with quiet dignity, tail wagging once but eyes focused, always scanning as though his duty never ended. The stage at the town square had been decorated with garlands of pine branches and cloth banners. At the center stood Mayor Linda Carver, a broad-shouldered woman in her early 50s, her auburn hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck. Known for her blunt tone and sharp gaze, Linda had built her reputation as someone who never sugar-coated hard truths. She adjusted the microphone with hands calloused from years of farm work before entering politics. Her voice rang out over the crowd. Redwood Bluff has weathered storms before, but this time we nearly lost ourselves to corruption and deceit. Today we honor those who reminded us that justice is not a convenience but a duty. She gestured towards Sam, her expression warming. Samuel Whitaker, your courage, your composure, and your dignity in the face of injustice have reminded us what integrity looks like. Applause erupted, the sound echoing off the storefronts. Sam inclined his head humbly, but it was Ranger who drew the loudest cheer when Linda added, and of course, to the four-legged officer who kept his nose on the Truth Ranger. Naomi Price stood nearby, her black curls catching the light, her eyes bright. She had exchanged her uniform for a simple dark green dress, but her badge still clipped to her belt. It was symbolic. She wanted the town to know she carried both her identity and her responsibility with her. In the past week, Naomi had been working tirelessly to draft reform proposals, mandatory body cameras, independent oversight, and stricter evidence handling procedures. Now, standing in front of her neighbors, she felt something rare, a cautious hope. Ethan Cole stood off to the side of the stage, his uniform crisp but his posture subdued. His square jaw was set, but the weight of guilt still hung from his broad shoulders. When Mayor Carver finished her speech, Ethan stepped forward. The crowd hushed, sensing the gravity of the moment. Ethan took the microphone, his steel blue eyes sweeping the faces before him. "I owe you all the truth," he began, his voice steady but low. "I arrested Samuel Whitaker without cause. I let myself be blinded by orders, by appearances, by the fear of disobedience. I was wrong, dead wrong." He turned toward Sam. "Mr. Whitaker, I humiliated you in front of this community, and yet you carried yourself with more grace than I showed with all my authority. I am sorry." A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd, but Sam simply nodded, his deep voice carrying without a microphone. "The measure of a man is not that he makes mistakes, Officer Cole, but how he seeks to repair them." The applause that followed was not thunderous, but steady, thoughtful, and it carried the weight of forgiveness beginning to take root. As the speeches ended, the square gave way to laughter and music. Children clustered around Ranger, who had been coaxed into a small performance. Naomi gave a command, and the German Shepherd dashed into the crowd, nose twitching, until he found a red scarf hidden beneath a hay bale. He brought it back to the delighted squeals of the children. Naomi tossed a baseball into the throng, and Ranger retrieved it flawlessly. The crowd clapped and laughed, the tension of the past days dissolving into joy. But the highlight came unexpectedly. Ranger sniffed the air suddenly and bounded away from the stage. Naomi and Ethan exchanged startled looks and followed, pushing through the crowd. The dog led them straight to a stall where Mrs. Hattie Owens, a plump woman in her late 60s with rosy cheeks and a perpetual twinkle in her eye, was selling her famous apple pies. Ranger barked once, then planted himself proudly in front of the steaming stack of pastries. The crowd erupted in laughter, and Mrs. Owens bent down, wiping her flour-dusted hands on her apron. "Well, hero or not, even a working dog knows a good pie when he smells one," she said warmly, handing Ranger a small crust to the cheers of children. Naomi shook her head, smiling, while Ethan chuckled for the first time in days. Meanwhile, Tyler Briggs lingered at the edge of the square. Cleaned up, his hair trimmed, and a fresh shirt on, he looked less like the frightened boy from the warehouse, and more like a young man trying to start again. His mother, Claire Briggs, stood beside him. Claire was in her early 40s, slim but worn, with dark hair tied back hastily and worry lines etched deep around her mouth. Life had not been easy for her. She worked double shifts at the diner since her husband walked out years ago, but today her eyes shone with relief seeing her son safe. Ethan approached them quietly, his tall frame casting a shadow. He extended his hand to Tyler, who hesitated before shaking it. Ethan's voice was low but firm. "You've been through hell, but you've got a second chance now. I'll make sure you get into a trade program, something steady. You won't face this road alone." Claire's eyes filled with tears. She clasped Ethan's hand with both of hers. "Thank you. He just needs someone to believe in him." The music swelled again as fiddles and guitars played from the stage. Sam walked slowly through the square, people patting his shoulder, thanking him. treating him not as a suspect but as a symbol of resilience. When he stopped near the veterans' booth, he pulled out a checkbook. With deliberate strokes, he wrote a donation to restore the town's Veterans Fund, specifying that a portion must go to scholarships for disadvantaged youth. "Invest in them," he told the organizer, a gray-haired Marine named Frank Dillard. "They'll carry us forward." Frank, broad-shouldered with a limp from an old injury, clasped Sam's hand firmly. "You've already carried us further than we deserved." As the sun dipped lower, the square glowed with lanterns strung across rooftops. Children danced. Ranger lay at Sam's feet with his head resting on his paws. And for one brief evening, Redwood Bluff was united not in fear, but in celebration. The winter air along the Redwood River carried a clarity that seemed new, as if the town itself had exhaled the last of its rot and was breathing freely for the first time in years. The pines stood dark against a pale sky, their branches stiff with frost. Morning sunlight touched the ripples of the river, turning them into threads of silver. Samuel Whitaker walked along the bank, his coat buttoned neatly, his gait steady despite the cold. Beside him padded Ranger, his breath rising in soft puffs, ears pricked forward, his body still lean and powerful though the gray along his muzzle had spread since the ordeal. His amber eyes gleamed with the alert calm of a soldier who had earned rest but never let his guard down. Months had passed since the storm of corruption had broken over Redwood Bluff. Sheriff Harold Mitchell, once the face of authority, now awaited trial in Portland. His arrogance had withered in the courtroom. Even his silver hair seemed duller under the harsh lights of justice. Vance Harlow, caught with stacks of counterfeit pharmaceuticals and recordings of his exchanges with Mitchell, faced charges that promised decades behind bars. The town whispered about their downfall for weeks, but gradually their names faded, replaced by new ones, names tied to reform, resilience, and renewal. At the Sheriff's Department, Naomi Price now stood as head of a newly created reform division. The council had tasked her with rewriting procedures, introducing oversight, and retraining officers. She had traded her detective's desk for an office cluttered with reports and draft policies, but her sharp focus never dulled. Her determination had only deepened. She often reminded her colleagues, "Our job is not to protect the badge, it's to protect the people." It was a mantra that unsettled some veterans but inspired the younger recruits. Ethan Cole had changed as well. Where once his broad shoulders carried the stiff pride of authority, now they bore humility. He had begun attending community meetings, listening rather than talking, sometimes standing in uncomfortable silence as residents voiced grievances. The townsfolk noticed his transformation, and though forgiveness was not immediate, it was slowly earned. He had taken on mentoring younger officers, reminding them that obedience without conscience was dangerous. "The uniform doesn't make you right," he told them. "Your choices do." One of the brightest sparks of change was Tyler Briggs. The skinny 19-year-old who had once trembled in fear at the warehouse now wore clean clothes and carried himself with cautious confidence. Through Sam's sponsorship and Naomi's recommendation, he had joined the community center as an assistant. There, he helped run after-school programs, guiding children away from the paths he nearly walked. His mother Claire still worked long hours at the diner, but when she saw Tyler reading to a group of kids or showing them how to fix bicycles, her face carried a pride she had thought lost forever. The Sheriff's Department had even launched a new initiative, the Justice K-9 Unit, dedicated not only to law enforcement but to outreach programs. Ranger was honored as its living symbol. Posters of him, amber eyes shining, scar visible on his flank, hung on the station wall beneath the motto, "Protect, Serve, Respect." Naomi often joked that Ranger had become more popular than any officer in town, and perhaps more trusted too. This morning, as Sam walked along the frosted bank, he paused at a small wooden marker recently erected beside the river. Its inscription was simple, carved with careful hands. Here, truth was set free, thanks to a dog's courage. A wreath of pine boughs and winter berries lay at its base, placed there by townsfolk who remembered. Sam touched the marker gently, his weathered fingers lingering on the carved words. Ranger sat at his side, ears tilted, as if understanding. Footsteps approached behind him. Sam turned to see Ethan and Naomi coming down the path together. Ethan wore a heavy brown coat, his square face softened by the morning light. Naomi was bundled in a navy scarf, her dark curls peeking out, her eyes bright with the resolve that had become her hallmark. They greeted Sam with nods of familiarity that needed no words. For a moment, the three stood quietly, watching the river move. Then Ethan spoke, his voice low but steady. "Sam, I don't know if I'll ever make peace with how I wronged you, but I'll spend the rest of my career trying to make sure it doesn't happen again." Sam's deep voice was calm, almost paternal. "Then you've already begun. Justice isn't a gift we hand out. It's a duty we carry every day, even when it's heavy." Naomi smiled faintly, glancing at Ranger. "And sometimes we need a dog to remind us where the trail really leads." At that, Ranger stood, tail wagging once, and moved forward between them. Sam, Ethan, and Naomi fell into step beside him, walking together along the riverbank. The morning sun rose higher, painting the water in gold, their shadows stretching long and united across the frost. In that simple act, three lives, once divided, now moving side by side, the town of Redwood Bluff found its symbol, that justice was not an act of mercy, but of responsibility, shared by all who dared to uphold it. At the end of this story, we are reminded that justice is not simply a law written on paper, but a living truth carried out through courage, humility, and compassion. What happened in Redwood Bluff feels almost like a miracle, a moment where light pierced through corruption and lies. And in every miracle, we can see the hand of God guiding us toward what is right. In our daily lives, we too face moments where it is easier to stay silent or look away. But like Sam, Naomi, Ethan, and even Ranger, we are called to stand for truth, to protect the vulnerable, and to believe that God's justice will always prevail. If you believe in the power of truth and the grace of God's miracles, I invite you to share this story, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more. May the Lord bless and protect everyone watching, filling your days with strength and peace. Comment Amen below if you believe that God can turn even the darkest trials into light.